So now let's look at the splines. The splines are up here where you see this little pencil. And there's a couple different ways to draw splines, which are these here, which are ones that you can actually draw. And then these blue ones are ones that are pre-made. So let's try let's try the simplest spline drawing type, which is the freehand tool, which you can just draw in the viewport. So it makes this spline, which are a lot like the Bezier tool, or if you've ever drawn masks in After Effects or messed around with masks in Photoshop or Illustrator, they work the same. So it's a line connected by points. So the way you would edit this is that you would have to be in point mode, and then we can use our move tool. And now you can move these points along, and if you've used splines before, you'll recognize these handles that you can use to modify the object. And if you click on one handle, it'll do both. If you hold shift, it does one, which is a lot like other programs that have these kind of splines. And you can move these around, and if you look at the different types here, Bezier, B-spline, Okuma, cubic, linear, that has to do with the spline interpolation, the way it's interpreted. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, this will. So by default, this freehand spline, which we can rename that freehand, is using the Bezier spline type. And if I click here, you can see the pop-up with the different types. So it doesn't matter which way you draw it with, you can always switch the type. So now if we go in linear, you see now it has these sharp edges because it's using a linear interpolation. So once you draw something, you can go in here and then try the different spline types and adjust it to get it to look the way you want. So just because you drew it one way doesn't mean you can't switch it into another way. Closed spine, it connects the whole thing. And these have to do with the intermediate points, or how the points are interpolated. But the real thing to know is just about the spline types and how to switch them. And when you're drawing splines, it can be really helpful to go into one of the isometric views, because if you just draw splines in the viewport, you can draw them in 3D, which now let's try a B-spline. This one you draw by clicking. And you can see it's kind of, is it flat, is it crooked? I don't really know. So let's go into press F2 and go to a top view. So now we can draw this one, and we know that it's going to be lying flat like that. So it can help you if you, it's really tough to draw splines in the perspective view. So try one of the other views to draw them in. And these other splines are just what they look like. They're pre-made for you. And like the other primitives, these two are parametric objects. So to edit their points, you have to press C and make them editable. Now we can edit their points, but I'm going to undo that. Because like the other parametrics or primitives, you can see you have these special features here that you can play around with to make these splines look closer to what you want them to look like. So again, before you start, trying to draw some really complicated splines, go in here, choose one of these pre-made objects, and then tweak around with its settings, its special settings here, and see if you can get it to look the way you want to look before you try to draw some freehand splines or modify the points, because that can really be hard, and it can be really hard to get what you want sometimes. So really explore these settings on these objects before you go try to make your own. And I'm sharing that from my own experience, where I would go and try to draw these complicated splines when I first started, and then later I learned, I was like, oh, I could have just used this preset one and changed a couple of these settings, and my work was done. So that's why I want to show these to you first, so you can go try these out and tweak around with them and make it look like the stuff you want it to look like before you spend hours drawing freehand splines and trying to tweak out the points. So the thing that really makes the splines come to life, because like with these splines, like let's take this flower one for example, it's just 2D. So this won't be rendered. There's really nothing there. You either use splines as paths for things to move along, which I'll show you how to do that in the animation portion, but these things that are sitting here right next to them, so these are what bring the splines to life. Mostly the extrude, the loft, the lathe, and the sweep, and the Bezier. But most of the time you're going to use sweeps and extrudes. So let's show you how that works. So if I create an extrude, you'll see that nothing happens. And the way you make the extrude act upon the spline is that you grab the spline and drop it into the extrude object. Now you'll see that it's extruded, and now if we were to render this, we have geometry. So, and now you know to go look in the attribute editor, and we have these attributes for the extrude. So it's already set to extrude 20 centimeters on the Z, so we can increase that. And if you wanted to, you can change the axis, but most of the time you're going to be extruding things like if you want some 3D text, or you're bringing in splines made in Illustrator or something, some kind of art. That's all you're going to do is extrude it here. And like on the other objects, you have these caps, which to make it look really nice, you can choose fillet and make sure that you have a fillet cap. Actually, oops, sorry about that. So a fillet doesn't include the cap, which is the top. It just fillets these top edges. So you want it with a cap if you just want nice beveled edges. And then you can control the number of steps. And again, if you can't really see what's happening here, then switch the displayed mode to line. So now let's look at this, and then I'll change the steps, and you see it's adding these steps here. So it's making it look smoother, but it's adding more geometry. And usually in 3D, you want to use as little geometry. You want it to be as simple as possible, because the more polygons and points you have, it slows things down. So you want to try to keep it simple. So these objects, like this extrude, are what bring your splines to life. So let's go through some of these other ones. So the lathe is something where you need a profile. So let's take this, actually let's draw one. So let's go into the left view, and I'm just going to draw something really crappy like that. But then it switched into Bezier, so it makes it look nice. Or sort of nice. Not that nice. Better than I can draw with my bare hand. So now we have this profile. Now, if we drop this into the lathe, look at that. Now we have some kind of vase or something like that. So the way the lathe works, it takes a profile and then mirrors it all the way around. So, like with the other objects, you can go in here and adjust these settings. Right? If you don't want it to go all the way around, you can do that. You can adjust the caps. You can do the fillet caps for the top and bottom to make things look nice. And something else that's really cool about this, that if we go back into the side view and see our spline is still here, it's still active inside of this object. That's what's so awesome about these. And it's an editable spline. Just go back to this flower. You see it's parametric, so I'd have to press C to make that one editable. But let's go back in the spline in the lathe. And we know splines can be adjusted by points. So if I adjust these points, look, you can actually resculpt and modify your lathe in real time because it's acting on the spline. So let's get rid of that one. So this is kind of a really cool way to model stuff, because you can drop it in there and then you can modify it. And if you want to make things bigger or smaller, you can just pull them in and out like this. You can adjust the handles. So if you really want to see what's going on, you can move into line mode. You see these are kind of weird, like crossing over here. So there we go. That's better. And if you want to add points, you control click on a spline and it'll add a point for you. So then we can do this and add that and go ahead and modify this thing. So you can get some pretty cool looking stuff pretty easily with the lathe. Let's get rid of that and go into our loft. And this one is for making structures like tents and things like that. That's kind of how I think of it. So let's get an arc, which is this guy. But then we want the arc to be 180 degrees. Let's change this. See if we can change the type too. But we want to keep an arc. And then I'm going to, if I control drag here in the object manager, it copies things. So now I have a copy, and then let's make this one smaller. And then I'm going to make another copy by control dragging, and I'm going to make this one even smaller. So now, if I take the first object, and the loft will connect things in order as you drag them. So I'm going to drop in the first one. It does that, which isn't very exciting. I'm going to drop in the second one, so it connects the two, and then I'm going to drop in the third one, and now we have this. So you can kind of imagine how this can be helpful. And we can go into the loft, and its object settings again. These subdivisions are helpful to go look in the lines, so you can see what's going on. Like that. You can try some of these other settings, see what they do. And you'd be surprised like how fast and how easy you can make some interesting looking stuff. And these are still editable if I make them editable. I can go in here, and if I go into the line mode to make it easier to see the points, I can still adjust the points while it's inside the loft or inside any of these generator objects. That's what these are known as, generators. If you have to add something else inside of them, or if they have an action that's live, it's a generator object. So you can do that and adjust them. You can adjust the order, which will probably screw things up and make it look weird. But that's how the loft works. And the last one, but this is kind of one that you'll probably use the most, is the sweep. So let's go ahead and get another, let's get the flower again. So let's say you just wanted to have this swept, or give this some thickness, some density. The way the sweep works is that you need two splines. So you see, if I put this flower in the sweep, nothing happens. So what we're saying is that we want this spline to be traced, and then we have to give it another spline to trace it with. So I'm going to scale down this circle, and then if I put the circle in, now we have that. So the circle, which then I can scale, is tracing the other spline. So that's how sweeps work. And you use sweeps a ton. Like I said, this is the one I use the most and what I do. And these are always live. You can take them out, you can put another spline, you can make this editable and change the type. You can do whatever you want. Well, because this thing always stays live. And to end this part, what I should show you is, so let's say you wanted to edit these polygons, the edges or points, to this piece, right? Well, we can't do it now, and that's because this generator is like a parametric object that's not editable. So just like anything else in Cinema 4D, we can press C, and then now this thing is polygons. So now we can act on these polygons or points or edges. So just a tip I'll give you, before you make it editable, just make sure that you modified the base objects or elements to get as close to your final model or whatever you want to make it as before you make it editable, because you can't go backwards. And that's just a real smart way to work. I mean, you can undo it, but make sure you've done everything you can to get it to look the way you want before you make it editable, because you can't go back. So that was a little thing on splines and the most common ways to bring your splines to life, which are these. And the last one in this category here, which is the Subdivision Surface. Or if you have an older version of Cinema 4D, it was called HyperNurbs. So what this does, the easiest way to show you is with a cube. So this cube, which I will make editable. So what Subdivision Surface does is that it subdivides the object that you put in it. So you have to put a polygonal object. So what that means, this object has one polygon per face, right? So when you subdivide it, it's going to divide it by 4, divide it by whatever number exponentially that is put into the settings of the Subdivision Surface. So if we take this cube and put it in the Subdivision Surface, now it's being subdivided so that it's smoother and has a lot more polys than it was before. And as you can see, we can adjust this here. So editor is what it looks like in the editor, and then render is what it renders by. So if I set it to 1 there, but then I render it to 4, then you see that it's smoother. And this render that I just did, you have to press Shift R, or it's this one right here. or this one, render to picture viewer. That's how you get it out. But so that's what this subdivision surface is for. So the way people would use this is if you had a character that you wanted to animate, you would want to animate the low poly version or the more the simpler version because it's faster. But then if you want it to look smoother when you render it, then you can have it set so that the subdivision surface makes it look smoother. And it's also just used for smoothing objects and things like that. So that's the last object in this menu, and I'll go over the subdivision surface more when we go over modeling.